The heat in the Valley of the Kings was a physical entity, a living, breathing beast that shimmered above the sand and baked the limestone cliffs until they radiated like a furnace. For Dr. Evelyn Evie Reed, however, the oppressive Egyptian sun was a familiar, almost welcome, adversary. It was the price of admission to the world's greatest open-air museum, a place where the secrets of gods and pharaohs lay sleeping just beneath the surface of the scorched earth. At 29, Evie was a woman forged in the crucible of academia and the harsh realities of fieldwork. Armed with a degree from the University of Chicago and a spirit as indomitable as the ancient monuments she sought to protect, she had carved out a respectable, if often contested, place for herself in the male-dominated world of 1920s Egyptology. Her current assignment, funded by the prestigious British Museum, was the culmination of her young career. A team of local workmen, known as pharaohs, had discovered the top of a previously unknown staircase during a preliminary survey near the base of a cliff, a telltale sign of an undisturbed tomb. The world, still gripped by the fever of Egyptomania following Howard Carter's discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb just a few years prior, was hungry for another such revelation. The discovery had brought with it not just the promise of historical glory, but the immediate, slithering threat of the jackals who always followed. The tomb robbers, the antiquities smugglers, the men who saw history not as something to be preserved, but as something to be plundered for profit. Evie's mission was twofold: to excavate the tomb with meticulous scientific precision, and to protect it with the ferocity of a dragon guarding its hoard. She had established a close rapport with her team of workmen, led by a wise and weathered foreman named Rashid. Unlike many of her European colleagues, Evie treated the local men not as mere laborers, but as essential partners in the discovery, respecting their deep, instinctual knowledge of the valley. This mutual respect had earned her their fierce loyalty. On this sweltering afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent towards the Theban hills, casting long, sharp shadows across the valley floor, a sense of electric anticipation hung in the air. The workmen had finally cleared the last of the debris from a sealed stone doorway at the bottom of the 16 steps. The plaster seal was intact, stamped with the faint but discernible cartouche of a little-known pharaoh from the Middle Kingdom. It was an untouched tomb, the discovery of a lifetime. As Evie knelt to examine the seal, her heart pounding with a scholar's thrill, a new shadow fell over the entrance of the dig site. It was long and sharp, cast by a figure who stood silhouetted against the brilliant, setting sun. "It seems the rumors are true, Dr. Reed," a voice drawled, the accent a lazy, charming blend of Irish lilt and British public school. "You've found yourself a pharaoh." Evie looked up, shielding her eyes. The man who stood before her was tall and lean, dressed in dusty but well-made linen trousers, a worn leather jacket, and a rakishly tilted fedora. He had a confident, almost arrogant air about him, and a slow, knowing smile played on his lips. His eyes, a startling shade of cobalt blue, seemed to miss nothing, taking in the entire scene with a practiced, appraising glance. This was no lost tourist. "And you are?" Evie asked, her voice cool and clipped, rising to her feet to face him. "The name's O'Malley," he said, striding forward with an easy, athletic grace. "Jack O'Malley, though my associates in Cairo sometimes refer to me as Dash." He tipped his fedora. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance." The name and the nickname sent a jolt of alarm through Evie. Jack Dash O'Malley. He was a legend in the shadowy underworld of the antiquities trade, an adventurer, a charmer, a man with a reputation for being able to acquire any artifact, no matter how well guarded. He was a treasure hunter, a polite and handsome term for a very sophisticated tomb robber. He was the very man she had been hired to stop. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. O'Malley," Evie said, her tone as arid as the desert sand. "I am surprised to see you so far from the back rooms of Shepherd's Hotel." He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "A man must follow his passions, Doctor, and my passion is for objects of rare and exquisite beauty." His blue eyes lingered on her for a moment before shifting to the sealed tomb door behind her. "Such as the ones you are about to uncover." Rashid and the other workmen had stopped their digging, their hands resting on their shovels, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and a grudging, almost fearful, respect for the infamous O'Malley. This is a designated archaeological site under the protection of the Egyptian government and the British Museum, Evie stated, crossing her arms. You are trespassing. Am I? He said, feigning surprise. My apologies. I must have taken a wrong turn on my afternoon ride. It is so easy to get lost out here. He gestured to a magnificent Arabian horse waiting patiently at the edge of the site. But since I am here, perhaps you would be so kind as to tell me what you have found. The cartouche is unfamiliar to me. His knowledge, his casual identification of the seal, confirmed her fears. He was no amateur. What I have found, Mr. O'Malley, is the cultural property of the Egyptian people, to be studied and preserved for all mankind, she said, her voice sharp with conviction. It is not a commodity to be bought and sold in some dusty Cairo back room to enrich a wealthy collector. Such fire, he murmured, a genuine admiration in his voice. I do love a woman of principle. But you and I both know that is not how the world works, Doctor. History belongs to those who can claim it. Some do it with a trowel and a brush. Others, he said, his smile widening, are a bit more direct. He was openly mocking her, challenging her. The audacity of the man was both infuriating and, to her own deep annoyance, slightly thrilling. He was unlike the dry academic men of the university or the stuffy, condescending officials of the museum. He was alive, a force of nature as wild and as unpredictable as the desert itself. I suggest you take your direct methods elsewhere, Mr. O'Malley, she said, her hands on her hips. My team and I are quite capable of protecting this site. I have no doubt of that, he said, his gaze sweeping over her small, determined team. But the desert has many eyes, and not all of its creatures are as civilized as I am. It would be a shame if something were to happen to your magnificent discovery before you have even had a chance to open the door. The veiled threat hung in the air, as heavy and as suffocating as the heat. He was not just a thief, he was offering a twisted form of protection, a partnership she knew would come at an impossibly high price. He seemed to read the fury in her eyes and laughed again. Do not worry, Doctor. I am a patient man. I will allow you the honor of opening the door. I am most eager to see what lies within. With a final, lingering look that was both a challenge and a promise, he tipped his hat, turned, and walked back to his horse. He mounted with an easy, fluid motion and, without a backward glance, rode off, his figure slowly dissolving back into the shimmering heat haze from which he had emerged. Evie stood frozen, her hands clenched into fists, her heart pounding with a mixture of rage and a strange, unwelcome excitement. She had just met her nemesis. The battle for the tomb and for the soul of the past had just begun. And she had the terrible feeling that the charming, roguish, and utterly dangerous Jack O'Malley was an opponent unlike any she had ever faced. The departure of Jack O'Malley left a palpable tension hanging in the air, thick and heavy as the desert heat. Evie's foreman, Rashid, a man whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles etched by a lifetime under the Egyptian sun, approached her, his dark eyes troubled. That man, Sitta, he said, using the respectful Arabic term for a woman of authority. He is a shaitan, a devil with a charming smile. He has the eyes of a hawk and the morals of a jackal. His presence here means trouble. Evie knew Rashid was right. Jack O'Malley was not a man who made idle threats. His visit had been a calculated move, a chess player placing his first piece on the board. He was not just a threat himself, he was the herald of a greater one. The news of an intact tomb, once whispered, would now be shouted in the back alleys of Cairo and the opulent lounges of Luxor. The wolves would begin to circle. We will post extra guards tonight, Rashid, Evie said, her voice more confident than she felt. And I will send a runner to the antiquities service in Luxor at first light, requesting an official detail. Rashid nodded, though the worried expression did not leave his face. They both knew the official guards were often poorly paid, unreliable, and no match for a determined band of robbers. For now, however, there was work to be done. The thrill of discovery, the sacred duty of her profession, momentarily eclipsed her fear. With the sun casting its last, long, golden rays across the valley, Evie gave the order. With painstaking care, using delicate chisels and brushes, she and her most trusted men began to break the ancient plaster seal on the tomb door. The moment they broke through, a puff of stale, dry air, trapped for over 3,000 years, escaped with a soft, ghostly sigh. The air inside smelled of dust, of time itself, of dried resins and something else, a faint, floral, otherworldly scent. Holding a lantern high, Evie was the first to peer inside. The sight that greeted her made her forget all about Jack O'Malley, all about the dangers of the desert. She was looking into an antechamber, a room filled with the treasures of a life meant to last for eternity. Golden chariots, dismantled and stacked against one wall, gleamed in the lantern light. Alabaster chests, their contents a mystery, sat sealed. Carved wooden statues of strange, animal-headed gods stood as silent sentinels. A magnificent gilded throne, inlaid with ivory and precious stones, sat in the center of the room, as if waiting for its king to return. Everything was covered in a fine, shimmering layer of dust, a blanket of forgotten centuries. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated wonder. This was why she did what she did. This was the magic, the sacred connection to a world long since vanished. For a long, blissful hour, she was not a guardian, but a privileged visitor, her heart soaring with the thrill of a scholar who has just been handed the key to a lost library. The news of their discovery, however, traveled on the desert winds. By the next evening, the vultures had begun to arrive. They were not as charming or as handsome as Jack O'Malley. They were a group of a dozen rough-looking men, their faces hard, led by a hulking, one-eyed man named Pharaoh, a notorious local bandit leader known for his brutality. They made a crude camp just a few hundred yards from the dig site, their intentions as clear as the stars in the night sky. They were waiting, watching, a pack of hyenas waiting for the moment to strike. Evie's request for guards was answered by the arrival of two bored, sleepy policemen from Luxor, who seemed more interested in her supply of tea than in protecting the tomb. The atmosphere at the dig site grew tense. Her workmen, usually so cheerful, were now quiet and watchful, their hands never far from their heavy digging tools. Evie herself began carrying a small, pearl-handled pistol her father had given her for protection, its weight in her pocket a constant, unwelcome reminder of the danger she was in. The first attack was not an attack at all, but a warning. During the night, someone had sabotaged their water supply, slitting the skins and allowing the precious liquid to seep into the sand. It was a clear, brutal message. You are vulnerable. You cannot survive here without our permission. Evie was now faced with an impossible situation. Her team was intimidated, her official protection was a joke, and their most vital resource was gone. She could send for more water, but it would take a day. She could abandon the site, but to do so would be to hand over her magnificent discovery to the waiting jackals. Her principles, her fierce dedication to the preservation of history, were being tested by a reality of thirst and violence. It was at dusk, as she stood alone, staring at Pharaoh's camp and grappling with her impossible choice, that a familiar figure on a magnificent Arabian mare once again emerged from the heat haze. Jack O'Malley dismounted and walked towards her, his expression no longer charming or mocking, but serious, almost grim. "It seems you have attracted some undesirable attention, Doctor," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant camp. "Pharaoh is a man of limited patience and even more limited finesse. He will not wait much longer. When he and his men decide to act, your two sleepy policemen will be the first to run. And I suppose you are here to offer your condolences before you pick over the scraps?" Evie shot back, her voice sharp with anger and desperation. "On the contrary," he said, turning his piercing blue eyes on her. "I am here to offer you a proposition. A business deal, if you will." She stared at him, incredulous. "You and I are the only two people in this valley who have a true, vested interest in this tomb," he stated calmly. "You, for the sake of history and knowledge. I, for the sake of, let us call it, professional appreciation. Pharaoh and his men see only gold to be melted down. They will destroy everything in their haste. They are bad for business, for both of us." He took a step closer, You cannot protect this tomb alone, Evie. You know it, and I know it. Your guards are useless, and your workmen, as loyal as they are not fighters. But I can protect it. I have the resources, the reputation, and the manpower to ensure that Pharaoh and his men disappear before sunrise and never return. And what is the price for this protection? She asked, her heart pounding. I am not a crude barbarian, Doctor. I do not want half the treasure, he said, a faint, wry smile touching his lips. I want something far more valuable. I want access. I want to be the first one to enter that tomb with you. I want to see what you see. And when the museum in London has taken its primary, most important pieces, I want the exclusive right to purchase, at a fair market price, any items they deem duplicates or of secondary importance. My clients pay handsomely for such things. We would both profit. The offer was a devil's bargain. It was a complete violation of the strict ethical principles that had guided her entire life. To make a deal with a known tomb robber, to commercialize any part of this sacred discovery, was anathema to her. And yet, she looked over at Pharaoh's camp, at the flickering fire and the rough, brutal men who surrounded it. She thought of the priceless, beautiful artifacts in the antechamber, of the history they held. In Pharaoh's hands, they would be melted down, their stories erased forever. In Jack O'Malley's hands, they would be sold, yes, but they would be preserved, appreciated by those who understood their beauty. He saw the war in her eyes. It is a choice, my dear doctor, he said softly. The lesser of two evils. You can hold fast to your pristine principles and lose everything to the barbarians, or you can make a deal with a civilized devil and save most of it. She looked at him, at his handsome, roguish face, at the undeniable logic in his cold, hard words. She hated him for it. She hated him for being right. You will give me your word, she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper, that nothing will be touched, nothing will be taken without the full, documented approval of the museum's curators. You have the word of a gentleman thief, he said, his smile returning, this time with a hint of triumph. She stared at him for a long, silent moment, the fate of a pharaoh's legacy hanging on her decision. She had come to Egypt to fight men like Jack O'Malley, but now, to save her discovery, she would have to join him. I accept your offer, Mr. O'Malley, she said, the words tasting like sand in her mouth. It seems we are to be partners. True to his word, Jack O'Malley was a man of swift and decisive action. As dusk settled, casting long purple shadows across the valley, two unmarked trucks rumbled up the desert track. They carried not a band of brutish thugs, but a small, disciplined team of a half-dozen men. They were hard-faced and weathered, clearly veterans of rough places, and they moved with the quiet, professional efficiency of a military unit. They were Jack's men. Under the command of a tall, silent man with startlingly intelligent eyes, they established a secure perimeter around the dig site. They set up lanterns, took up watchful positions on the surrounding cliffs, and relieved Evie's two terrified policemen, who were all too happy to accept a generous bonus from Jack and make a hasty retreat back to the relative safety of Luxor. By sunrise, the camp of Pharaoh and his bandits had vanished. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of a fight. They were simply gone, melted back into the desert from which they had come. Jack, through a network of whispers and a reputation that was more potent than any army, had made it clear that this particular tomb was now under his protection. The effect on Evie's camp was immediate. The palpable fear that had gripped her workmen was replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and security. They looked at Jack O'Malley not as a threat, but as a formidable, if unorthodox, patron. For Evie, the feeling was far more complicated. She now had the protection she so desperately needed, but it came at the cost of her principles. Jack O'Malley was now a constant presence at the dig site. He did not interfere with her work, but he was always there, a silent, watchful shadow, his piercing blue eyes missing nothing. He would stand for hours, observing their meticulous work, his expression unreadable. Their partnership, if it could be called that, was a tense and uneasy truce. He was the head of security, she was the director of antiquities. Their conversations were clipped, professional, and fraught with an underlying tension, a battle of wits between her scholarly idealism and his roguish pragmatism. "You must be more careful with the sifting screens, Doctor," he'd comment, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. A careless workman could easily miss a scarab or a small amulet. Such items, though small, can be quite valuable. "My concern is for historical context, Mr. O'Malley, not market value," she would retort, her voice cool. "A single bead, found in its proper place, can tell us more than a golden statue torn from its setting." He would simply smile his infuriating, charming smile. "Perhaps. But the statue pays for the expedition." Despite their conflicting philosophies, a grudging respect began to grow between them. He was, she was forced to admit, an expert in his own right. He had a sharp eye for detail, an encyclopedic knowledge of dynastic art, and an adventurer's instinct for the practical dangers of excavation. She, in turn, fascinated him. He had known many women, but he had never met one with her fierce intelligence, her unwavering passion, and her complete and utter indifference to his charm. She was not a prize to be won, but a fortress to be besieged, and he found the challenge utterly captivating. The day came to open the second inner door, the entrance to the burial chamber itself. The sense of anticipation was electric. This was the moment that would define the entire expedition. Jack stood beside Evie as her workman, with painstaking care, created a small breach in the top corner of the sealed doorway. A wave of warm, musty air, smelling of incense, dried flowers, and eternity, flowed out. It was the last breath of a long-dead pharaoh. Evie, her heart pounding, took a candle and held it to the opening, its flickering light a tiny, brave star against an abyss of ancient darkness. "Can you see anything?" Jack asked, his voice a low whisper beside her. For a moment, she was silent, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. And then she saw it. "Yes," she breathed, her voice full of a wonder so profound it was almost a prayer. "Wonderful things." The breach was carefully widened, and a few hours later the doorway was clear. With Jack at her side, holding a powerful electric lantern, Evie stepped across the threshold, the first person to enter this sacred space in over 3,000 years. The sight that greeted them was breathtaking. They were in the burial chamber. The walls were covered in magnificent, vibrant paintings, their colors as fresh and as brilliant as the day they were painted, depicting the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. The room was filled with funerary treasures, chests of ebony and ivory, alabaster canopic jars, and elegant, long-necked vases. And in the center of the room, dominating the space, was a magnificent golden sarcophagus. It lay untouched, serene, the carved face of the young king staring up at them with a look of peaceful, eternal slumber. For a long, silent moment, all the tension, all the conflict between them, dissolved in a shared sense of profound, reverent awe. They were not an archaeologist and a treasure hunter. They were two mortals standing in the presence of eternity. "He was just a boy," Evie whispered, her gaze fixed on the sarcophagus. "No more than 20 when he died, according to the inscriptions." "But he was a king," Jack murmured, his own voice unusually soft. "And he was loved." He gestured to the intricate detail of the surrounding treasures. This was not just a tomb. It was a testament to a great love. It was in that moment of shared wonder that the danger revealed itself. As Evie stepped forward for a closer look at a series of hieroglyphs, she did not notice the faint, almost invisible tripwire stretched across the floor at ankle height. A simple but effective ancient booby trap. Jack, with his adventurer's heightened senses, saw it at the last second. "Evie, look out!" he yelled. He lunged forward, his arm wrapping around her waist, and pulled her back with a powerful, desperate motion, just as the wire was triggered. A section of the ceiling directly in front of them groaned, and a massive block of limestone, loosened by the trap, crashed to the floor where she had been about to step, shattering into 1,000 pieces and sending up a cloud of ancient dust. They were left frozen, her back pressed against his chest, his arms a steel band around her. She could feel the frantic, heavy beat of his heart against her shoulder blades. She was trembling, not just from the shock of her near-death experience, but from the sudden, powerful intimacy of his embrace. He held her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, his breath warm against her hair. "It seems," he murmured, his voice a low, rough whisper by her ear, "that my services are more valuable than you anticipated." He slowly released her, stepping back, the professional distance returning, but the air between them was now charged with a new, undeniable current. He had saved her life. It was a debt that could not be repaid, a complication to their already fraught partnership that neither of them could ignore. That evening, as they sat by the campfire, the awkward silence was finally broken. "Thank you, Jack," she said, the use of his first name a quiet acknowledgement of the change between them. "You are welcome, Evie," he replied, his gaze meeting hers across the flickering flames. The deal they had struck was for a tomb, but in the heart of that ancient, dusty chamber, a new and far more dangerous treasure had been unearthed. A fragile, reluctant, and utterly compelling connection that threatened to be more valuable and more perilous than anything a pharaoh could have ever taken to his grave. The near-fatal accident in the burial chamber permanently altered the dynamic at the dig site. The sharp, antagonistic edge that had defined the relationship between Evie and Jack was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful current of a different kind. He had saved her life, a fact that was as undeniable and as solid as the golden sarcophagus that rested in the heart of the tomb. It was a debt she did not know how to repay, and a bond he seemed in no hurry to release. His role shifted from a mere guardian to an active and surprisingly invaluable partner in the excavation. His adventurer's instincts, honed by years of navigating treacherous and forgotten places, made him an expert at identifying structural weaknesses in the ancient tomb. He had a sixth sense for loose stones and unstable floors, and his presence became a source of quiet reassurance for the entire team. Evie, who had once bristled at his very presence, now found herself unconsciously looking for his nod of approval before entering a new, unexplored section. Their days were now spent working side by side in the close, quiet confines of the tomb, the world outside fading to an irrelevant, sun-scorched haze. It was in these hours, surrounded by the silent, golden faces of the dead, that they truly began to know each other. Their partnership became a fascinating fusion of their two disparate worlds. As they meticulously cataloged the artifacts, their complementary knowledge created a picture more complete than either could have achieved alone. Evie would look at an intricate pectoral necklace and see its religious significance, her fingers tracing the hieroglyphs that told of the goddess Isis offering protection in the afterlife. She would explain the complex mythology, her voice filled with a scholar's passion. Jack would listen, his gaze intense, and then he would offer a different kind of insight. "The class mechanism is a masterpiece of early metalwork," he'd murmur, his sharp eyes noting the technique. "I've seen similar work from a dig in Crete, which suggests a trade link no one has yet proven for this dynasty. And the quality of these particular lapis lazuli beads, they could only have come from the Badakhshan mines in what is now Afghanistan. The cost to bring them here would have been astronomical. This was not just a necklace, Evie. It was a statement of immense political power. She was constantly surprised by the depth of his knowledge, and he was perpetually captivated by the passion behind hers. In the shared awe of their discoveries, the lines between the principled archaeologist and the roguish treasure hunter began to blur. They were simply two people who shared a profound love for the beauty and the stories of the past. Their conversations, conducted in low murmurs in the echoing silence of the tomb, drifted from ancient history to their own. He learned of her childhood spent trailing her academic father on digs across the world, of her constant, frustrating battle to be seen as a serious scholar in a field dominated by men. She, in turn, learned pieces of his story. He spoke of a stifling aristocratic family in Britain who had planned a future for him in politics, a future he had run from at the age of 18, seeking a life of freedom and adventure in the world's forgotten corners. He was not a common thief, she began to realize, but a rebel, a man who valued freedom above all else. The fragile, burgeoning intimacy between them was tested by the arrival of the outside world. A senior official from the British Museum, a pompous, by-the-book bureaucrat named Mr. Abernathy, arrived from Cairo to inspect their progress. Abernathy was a man who moved through the world with a sense of unquestioned authority, and he immediately took a deep and profound dislike to the presence of the charming, unofficial adventurer at the dig site. Dr. Reed, Abernathy said on his first evening, his tone dripping with condescension as he looked at Jack, who was quietly observing their meeting from a distance. Can you explain to me why a man of Mr. O'Malley's reputation is being given free rein at a museum-sanctioned excavation? Mr. O'Malley is the head of our security, Mr. Abernathy, Evie replied, her voice calm and even. His presence has been essential in protecting the site from the very real threat of local bandits. Security? Abernathy scoffed. My dear woman, that is like hiring a fox to guard the henhouse. The man is a known tomb robber. His presence here is a scandal. It compromises the integrity of the entire expedition. I must insist that you dismiss him at once. Evie's heart pounded. This was a direct order from her superior, the representative of the very institution that funded her work and held the keys to her future career. To defy him would be an act of professional suicide. The logical, sensible part of her knew she should acquiesce. She owed Jack nothing more than a generous payment for services rendered. But then she thought of the past weeks. She thought of his strong arm pulling her back from a collapsing ceiling. She thought of his sharp eyes seeing a trade link she had missed. She thought of their shared laughter in the quiet of the tomb and of the profound unspoken understanding that was growing between them. To send him away now would feel like a betrayal. She lifted her chin, her gaze meeting Abernathy's without flinching. I am afraid that is not possible, sir, she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. Abernathy stared at her, shocked. Did I hear you correctly, Doctor? You did, Evie said. Mr. O'Malley was right. The desert has many eyes, and not all of them are civilized. Without his protection, this tomb would have been plundered within a week. His knowledge of this valley and its dangers has been more valuable than any official protection the Antiquities Service could provide. His presence here is not a compromise to this expedition's integrity. It is the sole reason this expedition still has any integrity. He stays. Her defiance, so calm and so absolute, left Abernathy momentarily speechless. He sputtered, threatening to report her insubordination to the board of directors before turning and storming back to his tent, a man whose authority had been unexpectedly and completely challenged. The camp was silent in the wake of the confrontation. Evie stood by the fire, her heart still racing, the full weight of her decision settling upon her. She had just risked her entire career, her life's work, for a charming, dangerous tomb robber. She heard a soft footstep on the sand behind her. It was Jack. He came to stand beside her, his usual wry smile absent, his expression one of quiet, profound gravity. You did not have to do that, Evie, he said, his voice a low murmur. You should not have risked your reputation for a man like me. Perhaps, she said, looking not at him, but at the ancient, star-filled sky. But a partnership is a partnership, Mr. O'Malley, and I have come to value this one. He was silent for a long moment. He reached out, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on the camp railing. His touch was warm, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that now existed between them, a bond that went far beyond their business deal. Jack, he said softly. She turned to look at him, a question in her eyes. My name, he clarified, his blue eyes holding hers in the firelight. To my partners, it's Jack. In that moment, under the vast, silent gaze of the Egyptian stars, the archaeologist and the thief were gone. In their place stood Evie and Jack, two people from different worlds who had just, against all logic and in defiance of all rules, chosen to stand together. The departure of Mr. Abernathy, who left the following morning in a cloud of indignant dust, was a quiet but significant victory. He had arrived as a figure of authority, intending to put the upstart female archaeologist and her roguish companion in their proper places. He left a man defeated, his authority completely undermined by their unshakable united front. His threats to report Evie to the museum board now seemed like the petulant whining of a man who had lost control. In his wake, a new and profound shift occurred in the atmosphere of the camp. The last vestiges of the formal Dr. Reed and Mr. O'Malley were gone, replaced completely by the easy camaraderie of Evie and Jack. The tension of their initial arrangement had evaporated, leaving behind the warm, comfortable glow of a genuine and deepening friendship. He was no longer just her protector. He was her confidant, her partner in every sense of the word. Their work in the tomb became a seamless dance of two minds that, though different, were perfectly attuned. They were an unstoppable team. Her deep, scholarly knowledge of the hieroglyphs, combined with his sharp, intuitive understanding of ancient craftsmanship, allowed them to unlock secrets that neither could have deciphered alone. One afternoon, while examining a large, painted wooden chest, Evie was stumped by a series of unusual symbols carved beneath the main inscription. They were not part of any known dialect. "It's a cipher," Jack said, peering over her shoulder, his proximity sending a now familiar jolt of warmth through her. "A secret message, hidden in plain sight. It's a trick sometimes used by scribes to pass on information they didn't want their masters to understand." He knelt beside her, and for the next hour they worked together, their heads bent close over the ancient puzzle. He with his rogue's knowledge of codes and hidden meanings, and she with her academic's understanding of the language, slowly began to piece it together. The message, when finally translated, was a poignant and heartbreakingly personal one. A love poem from the tomb's architect to the young queen who had died too soon. A secret declaration of a forbidden love hidden for 3,000 years. They looked at each other in the quiet, lantern-lit tomb, the ancient story of a secret love echoing in the space around them. The air grew thick with their own unspoken feelings, the line between the past and the present blurring into a single emotionally charged moment. It was Jack who broke the spell, his voice a low murmur. "It seems we are not the first to harbor dangerous secrets in this valley." A few days later, they needed to travel to Luxor to deliver their preliminary findings to the Antiquities Service and to replenish their dwindling supplies. Instead of taking the rough, dusty car, Jack arranged for them to travel down the Nile on a traditional felucca, a graceful, white-sailed boat that glided silently over the water. The journey was a magical respite from the heat and the dust of the dig. They sailed down the legendary river, the lush green banks of vibrant, living contrast to the stark, dry valley of the dead. They passed ancient temples, their colossal statues staring out over the water, and small villages where life seemed to have remained unchanged for centuries. They completed their business in Luxor, and as evening approached, they began their journey back, the setting sun turning the sky and the river to molten gold. As darkness fell, a brilliant, impossible canopy of stars appeared, so close it felt as if they could reach out and touch them. They sat together on the deck of the boat, a comfortable silence between them, the only sounds the soft lapping of the water against the hull and the gentle whisper of the wind in the sail. "I have spent my life chasing things, Evie," Jack said, his voice a low, reflective murmur in the quiet of the night. "Rare statues, forgotten jewels, the thrill of the next find. It was a life of constant motion, of never putting down roots. It was exciting, and it was profoundly lonely." He turned to her, his face serious in the soft, starlit darkness. "I came here for this tomb. I saw it as just another prize to be claimed, but I was wrong. I have found a treasure here in this desert that is far more rare and far more valuable than anything a pharaoh could have ever possessed." He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "I came here to watch you, to wait for my moment, but I found myself admiring you instead. I admired your passion, your intelligence, your fierce, unshakable integrity. You did not just risk your career for me, Evie. You reminded me of the man I once wanted to be. Before the cynicism of my world took hold, you have, in your own quiet way, excavated my own heart." His thumb stroked the back of her hand, his touch sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "I am in love with you, Evie Reed. It is the most direct and most honest truth I have ever known." Tears welled in Evie's eyes as she looked at him, at this charming, dangerous, and surprisingly honorable man. He had come into her life as a threat, an adversary. But he had become her protector, her partner, her dearest friend. She had been so focused on the stories of the past that she hadn't realized she was living the greatest story of her own life. "I believe, Jack O'Malley," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, that I have been falling in love with you since the moment you rode out of the heat haze and into my life." He smiled, a slow, radiant smile that seemed to outshine the stars themselves. He leaned forward, and in the heart of the ancient, timeless landscape of Egypt, under a canopy of 1,000,000 glittering diamonds, he kissed her. It was a kiss that was both a thrilling discovery and a peaceful homecoming. It was a kiss that bridged their two worlds, a perfect fusion of adventure and intellect, of passion and respect. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "The deal we made was for this tomb," he murmured. "I want to propose a new one." She looked at him, a question in her eyes. "When our work here is done," he said, his voice full of a new, exciting promise, "don't go back to your dusty museums and your stuffy boardrooms. Come with me. The world is full of lost cities, of forgotten treasures, of stories waiting to be discovered. Let us be partners, Evie, in all of it. Let's make the world our museum." It was the most extraordinary offer she had ever received, a life not of cataloging the adventures of others, but of living her own, a life with him. "Yes, Jack," she whispered, her heart soaring with a joy so immense it felt boundless. "Yes, it's a deal." The treasure hunter and the archaeologist had found their greatest prize. It was not buried in a tomb, but here, in each other's arms, a love as vast and as eternal as the starry Egyptian sky. The journey back from Luxor was a silent, beautiful dream. They sailed up the Nile under a canopy of stars, their hands clasped, their hearts full of the quiet, profound joy of their newfound love. The world of stuffy museums, of back-alley deals, of loneliness and of principles compromised seemed 1,000 miles away. In the simple, profound peace of that boat ride, there was only Evie and Jack, two partners who had finally, formally, agreed to the terms of a new and magnificent adventure. Their return to the camp marked a new era. The professional tension that had once defined their partnership was gone, replaced by an easy, affectionate camaraderie that was obvious to the entire team. They were a seamless unit. In the cool, quiet chambers of the tomb, they worked side by side, their intellectual partnership now imbued with a deep, loving intimacy. He would watch, fascinated, as she would gently brush the dust of 3 millennia from a fragile piece of pottery, her touch as tender as a caress. She would listen, captivated, as he would recount the history of a particular gemstone. His rogue's knowledge of the world's treasures now offered freely, a gift for her alone. Their work progressed at a remarkable pace. They had cleared the antechamber and the burial chamber, each day bringing a new, breathtaking discovery. Every artifact was meticulously photographed, catalogued, and packed by Evie for its eventual journey to the museum in Cairo. The centerpiece of their discovery, the magnificent golden sarcophagus of the boy king, remained in the burial chamber, its serene golden face a silent witness to their burgeoning love story. It was to be the last and most important piece to be moved. But the world outside their peaceful desert bubble had not been idle. Mr. Abernathy, the humiliated museum official, had returned to Cairo, his pride wounded, and it was there, in the smoky lounges of the Shepherd's Hotel, that his path had crossed with that of Baron von Hesse, a ruthless German industrialist and a collector of antiquities with a reputation for acquiring his treasures by any means necessary. Abernathy, in an act of petty vengeance against the woman who had defied him, told the Baron everything he knew about the tomb and its formidable, but unofficial, guardian, Jack O'Malley. For Baron von Hesse, the news that the tomb was protected not by a government army, but by a single adventurer and his small team, was an invitation. The golden sarcophagus of a lost pharaoh was a prize beyond compare, a jewel he was determined to add to his private collection. He began to gather his own team, not of archaeologists, but of hired mercenaries, ruthless men who cared nothing for history. The attack came on the night of a new moon, when the desert was plunged into a profound and disorienting darkness. Evie and Jack were in their tent, reviewing her notes by lantern light, when the first sharp crack of a rifle shot split the night air. Instantly, the camp erupted into chaos. Shouts and more gunshots echoed through the valley. Jack was on his feet in a second, his charming, roguish demeanor vanishing. replaced by the cold, hard focus of a seasoned fighter. He pushed a heavy pistol into Evie's hand. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent growl. "Do not leave this tent, no matter what." "Jack, no!" she cried. But he was already gone, melting into the darkness, a ghost moving towards the fight. From the flap of her tent, Evie watched in terror as the battle for the tomb began. A dozen armed men, led by a large, imposing European figure she assumed was the Baron, were advancing on the camp. Jack and his small team of 6 men, using the rocks and the excavation equipment for cover, were returning fire, their defense fierce but hopelessly outmatched. Evie's mind raced. She was not a fighter. She could not help them in a gunfight. But she was a scholar. She knew this valley, and she knew this tomb better than anyone. Her mind, her knowledge, was her only weapon, and she had to use it. Disobeying Jack's order, she slipped out the back of the tent, using the chaos and the darkness as her cover. She did not run towards the fight. She ran towards the tomb. Inside the dark, silent chambers, she worked with a frantic, desperate energy. She knew what the Baron was after, the sarcophagus. But there were other, smaller, priceless artifacts that would be easily pocketed in the chaos. She went to the burial chamber and, using a small crowbar, pried open a false panel in the floor, a hidden compartment she and Rashid had discovered weeks ago, designed to hold the Pharaoh's most sacred texts. Working quickly, she transferred the most precious of the smaller items, the king's golden death mask, his royal scepter, a series of jewel-encrusted pectorals, into the hidden compartment, replacing them in their crates with rocks and sand. But her greatest idea was one of pure, strategic genius. She ran to the antechamber, to the spot where the limestone block had fallen from the ceiling days before. The trap mechanism she had discovered was a simple pressure plate connected to a series of counterweights. She and Rashid had already stabilized the rest of the ceiling, but one large, precarious-looking section remained. Working with a feverish intensity, she used a heavy mallet and a chisel to dislodge the key support stone that held the counterweight system in place, leaving it balanced on a fragile, temporary wooden wedge. She then tied a long, thin rope to the wedge, ran the rope through the dark, winding corridors of the tomb, and out a small ventilation shaft near the main entrance. She emerged back into the chaotic, fire-lit night just as the Baron and his men, having pushed Jack's team back, were about to enter the tomb. "Jack!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the gunfire. "The antechamber! Get them into the antechamber!" Jack, seeing her, understood immediately. He trusted her. "Fall back!" he yelled to his men. "Back to the tomb!" They retreated, drawing the Baron and his mercenaries after them, deeper into the mouth of the ancient structure. The Baron, his face alight with greedy triumph, was the first to step into the antechamber, his men crowding in behind him. "It's a trap!" he yelled, seeing the empty crates. But it was too late. From her hiding place in the rocks above the entrance, Evie pulled on the rope with all her might. The wooden wedge, deep inside the tomb, dislodged. With a deep, groaning roar, the massive, unstable section of the antechamber's ceiling gave way, and tons of ancient limestone crashed down, completely sealing the main passage, trapping the Baron and his men inside. A stunned silence fell over the valley. The battle was over. Evie had not fired a single shot, but she had won the war. Jack ran to her, pulling her into his arms, his relief so profound he was trembling. "You magnificent, brilliant, disobedient woman," he breathed into her hair. "I told you to stay in the tent." "And let you have all the fun?" she replied, a shaky, triumphant laugh escaping her. They stood together, two unlikely partners, amidst the aftermath of the battle. The archaeologist and the treasure hunter. They had faced down their enemies, and they had protected their discovery. But more than that, they had protected each other. Their partnership, born in a clash of wills, had been tested by fire. And as they looked at the sealed tomb, a prison for the men who had tried to plunder it, they knew that their own bond was now, and forever, unbreakable. The desert fell into a stunned, ringing silence in the aftermath of the battle. The immediate threat was over, but a new, more complex problem remained. A very angry and very wealthy German baron, along with his disgruntled team of mercenaries, was now trapped inside their priceless, newly discovered tomb. Jack, ever the pragmatist, took immediate control. He and his men, along with a now deeply loyal Rashid, worked to clear the main passage just enough to create a small, controllable opening. Jack then entered the antechamber alone, a lantern in one hand and his pistol in the other, to negotiate the terms of surrender. He emerged an hour later, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Baron von Hesse, it turned out, was far more afraid of the scandal of being arrested for armed robbery of an archaeological site than he was of a night in a dusty tomb. A deal had been struck. In exchange for his freedom and Jack's silence on the matter, the Baron had agreed to sign over the deed to his magnificent villa in Alexandria and to make a very substantial anonymous donation to the British Museum, earmarked specifically for the preservation of the current dig. He had been forced to pay a king's ransom for his own failed robbery. By dawn, the Baron and his shamefaced men were released, their weapons confiscated, and they were sent walking back towards Luxor with a very clear warning from Jack that if they ever showed their faces in the valley again, their fate would be left to the desert. It was into this scene of quiet, triumphant cleanup that the official help finally arrived. A convoy of cars from the Antiquities Service, carrying a contingent of armed guards and a very flustered-looking Mr. Abernathy, rumbled up to the site. They had come expecting to find a disaster, to reprimand Dr. Reed for her insubordination. Instead, they found a secure, perfectly preserved tomb and a camp full of weary but victorious defenders. When the full story of the night's events was recounted by Rashid, of the Baron's attack, of Jack's fierce defense, and most importantly, of Evie's brilliant life-saving trap, Abernathy was left speechless, his face a mask of humiliated disbelief. Evie's controversial decision to partner with Jack had not compromised the expedition. It had saved it. Her reputation, far from being in tatters, was now sealed as a woman of not just academic brilliance, but of incredible courage and field leadership. She was a new kind of legend in the valley. With the tomb now officially secure, the final joyful work of the excavation could be completed. The next few weeks were a blissful, focused period of discovery. Evie and Jack worked side by side, their partnership a seamless fusion of their talents. Together they were the first to lift the heavy golden lid of the sarcophagus, revealing the perfectly preserved, linen-wrapped mummy of the boy king within. They deciphered the last of the tomb's secrets, piecing together the story of a short but brilliant reign, a story that would rewrite a chapter of Egyptian history. For Evie, it was the culmination of her life's dream. But she found, to her surprise, that the thrill of discovery was now secondary to the quiet, profound joy she felt in sharing it with Jack. The true treasure of this expedition was not the gold or the history. It was the man by her side. The day finally came when the last crate was sealed, ready for its journey to the museum in Cairo. The dig was over. The camp was being dismantled. A sense of bittersweet finality hung in the air. Evie's work here was done. She was expected to return to London, to a life of lectures, of writing papers, of stuffy academic debates. A life without him. That evening, their last in the desert, Jack took her by the hand and led her to the top of the cliffs overlooking the valley. They sat together, watching as the sun set, painting the ancient landscape in breathtaking shades of orange, purple, and gold. "It's a beautiful world, isn't it?" he said quietly, his arm around her. "It is," she said, her voice a soft whisper, her heart aching at the thought of leaving it, of leaving him. "Abernathy offered me a fortune for my share of the salvage rights from the Baron," he said, a wry smile on his face. "He is a man who knows how to turn a profit from another's misfortune." He then turned to her, his expression serious. "I told him to add it to the museum's preservation fund." Evie looked at him, shocked. "But Jack, that was your payment." "I have come to realize, my dear doctor," he said, his blue eyes full of a deep, sincere emotion, "that there are some treasures that have no price. Your respect is one of them." He reached into his pocket. "However, I did keep one small piece for myself. My fee, if you will." He opened his hand. Lying on his palm was a small, ancient ring, It was a simple, elegant piece of faience, a deep blue, with a single, beautifully carved scarab beetle on its face. It was found in the antechamber, separate from the main treasures, he explained. Likely dropped by a worker or a priest 3,000 years ago. It has little monetary value. Its value is in its story. He picked it up, his fingers brushing against hers. The scarab is a symbol of rebirth, of a new day, of a new life. He looked into her eyes, his heart in his own. I do not want to go back to my old life, Evie. A life of chasing thrills and empty treasures. My greatest adventure began the day I met you. You proposed we be partners. I would like to make that partnership permanent. He took her left hand and gently slid the ancient blue ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. I am not an aristocrat with a castle, and I am not a scholar with a university post, he said, his voice a low, heartfelt murmur. I am just a treasure hunter, and the only treasure I want for the rest of my life is you. Marry me, Evie Reed. Come with me. Let's make the world our museum, together. Tears of joy streamed down Evie's face as she looked from the ancient ring on her finger to the incredible, adventurous, and honorable man before her. She had come to this desert to uncover the story of a long-dead king. She had ended up finding the king of her own heart. Yes, Jack, she whispered, her heart soaring. Oh yes, it's a deal. Leaving Egypt was like waking from a strange and beautiful dream. Evie and Jack left behind the dust of the valley, the ghosts of the pharaohs, and the last remnants of their former lives. They traveled not back to the rigid, predictable worlds of London or Chicago, but to Paris, the vibrant, beating heart of the 1920s. The city was a whirlwind of art, of jazz, of new ideas, a perfect, liberating place for two people to reinvent themselves. They took a modest but charming apartment in the Latin Quarter, a space that quickly became a unique reflection of its occupants. One side of the Grand Salon was a meticulous, scholarly library, with Evie's books on history and archaeology neatly arranged, her research notes and maps pinned to a large corkboard. The other side was Jack's domain, a comfortable chaos of antique globes, strange artifacts from his travels, and a well-stocked bar cart. In the center of the room, a large oak table served as their shared headquarters, the place where her research and his adventurous spirit would merge to plan their future. For several months, they were simply a couple in love. They explored Paris, losing themselves in its museums, its cafes, its winding romantic streets. But they were two people of purpose, and the quiet life of leisure, though blissful, could not hold them for long. Their first joint venture began, as so many adventures do, with a whispered rumor in a dusty back alley bookshop. The story was of a lost collection of Marco Polo's original charts and journals, documents thought to have been destroyed centuries ago. Legend had it that they had been hidden not in a museum or a library, but in a secret compartment within a decaying, forgotten palazzo in Venice, the home of one of Polo's last descendants, who had died without an heir. For a historian, it was the stuff of myth. For a treasure hunter, it was an irresistible challenge. For Evie and Jack, it was the perfect first quest. Their partnership sprang to life. Evie spent weeks in the archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale, her sharp academic mind poring over ancient Venetian maps and obscure genealogical records. She was a detective of the past, a scholar piecing together a puzzle that had been cold for 600 years. She was the one who discovered the likely location of the secret room, hidden in a detail of the palazzo's original architectural plans. Jack, meanwhile, worked his own kind of magic. He tapped into his vast, shadowy network of contacts, the art dealers, the information brokers, the disgruntled aristocrats. He was the one who learned that the palazzo was now owned by a reclusive and notoriously corrupt Italian official who was using it for his own illicit dealings. A frontal approach was impossible. They would have to be more direct. They arrived in Venice in the dead of a misty, foggy night, the city of canals a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Jack, with the confidence of a man who was at home in any back alley in the world, guided them through the winding, watery streets in a silent gondola. The official is hosting a lavish, illegal gambling party tonight, he whispered to Evie, his voice a low murmur in the misty air. It is the perfect cover. Everyone will be drunk, distracted. It is our only chance to get inside undetected. His plan was audacious, dangerous, and thrilling. While he, with his charming smile and seemingly bottomless wallet, would infiltrate the party to create a well-timed diversion, Evie, with her maps and her knowledge, would slip away to find the hidden room. They entered the grand, decaying palazzo, a place of faded frescoes and glittering chandeliers. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of illicit champagne. Jack, looking impossibly handsome in a black tuxedo, immediately became the life of the party, his charm a potent, disarming weapon. He engaged the host in a high-stakes game of cards, his laughter echoing through the room, drawing the attention of every guest. Evie, dressed in a simple dark dress that allowed her to blend into the shadows, slipped away. She navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the old palace, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was no longer just an academic. She was an adventurer, a partner in a daring heist. She found the room from the ancient blueprints, a small forgotten library on the second floor. Using the clues from her research, she located the secret mechanism, a loose floorboard hidden beneath a heavy rug. She pulled it up, revealing a dark, narrow space. Inside was a single iron-bound chest. It was in that moment of triumph that the floorboards behind her creaked. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, to see two of the host's brutish guards blocking the doorway. But before they could take a step, another figure appeared behind them. It was Jack. The charming gambler was gone, replaced by the swift, silent fighter. He moved with a speed and a precision that was breathtaking, disarming the two large men with a series of quick, efficient blows that left them groaning on the floor. "It seems your work attracts a rather rough class of patron, my dear doctor," he said with a wry smile, offering her a hand. Together, they lifted the heavy chest. They made their escape through the back of the palazzo as the sounds of a manufactured brawl, Jack's brilliant diversion, erupted from the main hall. They were back in their gondola and disappearing into the Venetian fog moments before anyone even realized they, and the chest, were gone. Back in their Paris apartment, they opened their prize. Inside, perfectly preserved, were the lost journals of Marco Polo, his elegant script detailing his incredible journeys to the East. It was a discovery that would rewrite history. They looked at each other, their faces illuminated by the single lamp in their office, the priceless journals spread out before them. They had done it. Their partnership, his skills and hers, had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. "What do we do with it now?" Evie asked, her voice full of a quiet awe. "It belongs in a museum." "Yes," Jack said, a new, noble light in his eyes. "It does, but not in a private collection, and not sold to the highest bidder." He took her hand. "We will donate it, anonymously, to the public library in Venice, where anyone who wishes to can see it. We are not thieves, Evie. We are liberators of history." In that moment, Evie saw the full, brilliant truth of the man she loved. He was not just a rogue, he was a man of deep, hidden honor. And she saw the truth of the life they were building. It was a life of adventure, of discovery, and of a shared, noble purpose. They were not just husband and wife. They were partners, a new kind of explorer for a new age. And their greatest adventures were still to come. The anonymous donation of Marco Polo's lost journals to the city of Venice sent shockwaves through the cloistered worlds of academia and high-stakes antiquities collecting. It was an act of unprecedented and baffling generosity. The journals were, by any measure, priceless, worth a fortune on the black market. For them to simply appear, gifted to a public institution for the benefit of all, was an event so unusual it bordered on the mythical. Whispers began to circulate in the smoky auction houses of London and the quiet libraries of American universities. There was a new force at work in their world, a ghost, a benefactor with the skills of a master thief and the morals of a saint. For Evie and Jack, it was simply the beginning. Their Parisian apartment became the headquarters for their new, shared life's work. They were no longer an archaeologist and a treasure hunter. They had become, as Jack had so perfectly phrased it, liberators of history. Their mission was a unique and noble one. to track down priceless artifacts that had been lost, stolen, or hidden away in the greedy hands of private collectors, and to return them to the public domain where they belonged. They were a perfect team, their skills a seamless fusion of intellect and action. Evie was the heart of their research operation. She would spend weeks buried in the archives of Europe's great libraries, her sharp academic mind a brilliant detective, piecing together clues from ancient texts, forgotten letters, and dusty shipping manifests. She could track the provenance of a lost artifact through centuries of silence, her passion for the past a relentless, searching light. Once she had a lead, Jack would take over. He was the man of action, the master of the field. He would travel to the far corners of the world, using his vast network of contacts and his own roguish, undeniable charm to navigate the dangerous underworld of the antiquities trade. He could talk his way into a Swiss banker's private vault, win a crucial piece of information in a high-stakes card game in Monte Carlo, or convince a suspicious port official in Shanghai to look the other way. He never used violence, only his wits and his formidable reputation. Together, they were unstoppable. Their next adventure took them to a remote, windswept monastery in the Spanish Pyrenees. Evie, through her research, had discovered that a lost early manuscript by Leonardo da Vinci, a treatise on human anatomy, had likely been stolen from the Vatican Library during the Napoleonic Wars and was now hidden in the monastery's archives, its existence unknown to the modern world. They traveled together, posing as a wealthy married couple on an architectural tour. While Evie charmed the elderly abbot with her deep, genuine knowledge of medieval architecture, Jack, using a set of forged credentials that identified him as a visiting scholar, gained access to the monastery's fabled off-limits library. There, hidden behind a false wall, just as Evie's research had predicted, he found the Da Vinci manuscript. They did not steal it. Instead, they presented their findings to the abbot, along with irrefutable proof of its origin. The abbot, a good and honest man, agreed to return the priceless document to the Vatican. Their victory was not in the acquisition of the treasure, but in its rightful restoration. From there, they traveled to the jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula on the trail of a set of rare Mayan codices that had been stolen by a corrupt American industrialist. They found the precious, fragile documents being stored in a humid, unsecured warehouse at a logging camp, on the verge of being destroyed forever by the elements. In a thrilling, heart-pounding race against time and the industrialists' armed guards, they managed to liberate the codices, replacing them with clever forgeries. The real artifacts were anonymously delivered to the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, where their discovery shed new light on a lost civilization. Through it all, their love deepened. Their partnership was not just professional, it was a profound, intimate, and joyful union. They were two people who had been lonely wanderers, and they had finally found their home in each other and in their shared purpose. They were adventurers, scholars, partners, and lovers. The only thing they were not, officially, was husband and wife. The subject of their own marriage had been a quiet, unspoken question. Their life together was so perfect, so complete, that the idea of a formal ceremony seemed almost redundant. But one beautiful spring evening in Paris, as they celebrated the success of their Yucatan adventure at a small romantic cafe overlooking the Seine, Jack reached across the table and took her hand. "Evelyn, read," he said, his voice a low, serious murmur. "We have liberated the treasures of pharaohs and the journals of explorers. We have faced down bandits, outsmarted corrupt officials, and rewritten history. There is only one partnership left to make official." He slid from his seat and knelt on one knee on the cobblestones of the Parisian sidewalk, oblivious to the surprised glances of the passers-by. He held up the simple, ancient blue scarab ring that she had never taken off since the day he had given it to her in Egypt. "You are my partner in every adventure, the keeper of my heart, and the greatest treasure I have ever found," he said, his blue eyes shining with a deep, unwavering love. "I believe it is time we signed a permanent contract. Will you finally, officially, marry me?" Evie looked down at the incredible, adventurous, and honorable man kneeling before her, and her heart overflowed with a happiness so profound it was almost a physical thing. Their life together was already a masterpiece. This was simply the moment they signed their names to it. "Yes, Jack," she whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. 1,000 times yes. Their wedding took place a week later, not in a church or a stuffy municipal building, but on the deck of a simple, elegant boat as it sailed slowly down the Seine at sunset. Their only guests were a handful of their closest friends from the Parisian art world. They exchanged vows as the golden light of the setting sun bathed the city in a romantic, painterly glow. They did not promise each other a life of peace and quiet. They promised each other a lifetime of shared discoveries, of facing the unknown together, of never, ever being bored. As the boat drifted past the grand illuminated facade of the Louvre Museum, Jack pulled his new wife into his arms. "Where to next, Mrs. O'Malley?" he murmured into her hair. She smiled, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of their shared future. "I hear there's a lost city in the jungles of Cambodia that is said to be guarded by tigers," she whispered. He laughed, a deep, happy sound that echoed over the water. "Then we shall go and introduce ourselves." He kissed her then, a kiss filled with the promise of 1,000 more adventures to come. The archaeologist and the treasure hunter had found their true calling. Their legacy would not be written in any single museum, but across the entire map of the world, a testament to a love that was as grand and as adventurous as history itself. The world in the decade that followed their wedding on the Seine became their private treasure map. The names Jack and Evie O'Malley became a quiet legend, whispered with a mixture of reverence and excitement in the hallowed halls of the world's greatest museums and in the dusty, far-flung camps of archaeological expeditions. They were the brilliant, enigmatic couple who seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to uncover the world's lost stories. Their foundation, which they named the Compass Rose, became a revolutionary force in the world of history. It was built on their unique, shared ethos. They would use Jack's vast network and adventurous skills to track down and liberate priceless artifacts from the hands of greedy, secretive private collectors. But then, guided by Evie's unwavering academic integrity, they would ensure these treasures were returned not just to any museum, but to the public institutions of their countries of origin, along with anonymous grants to fund their preservation and study. They were not just adventurers, they were restorers of a fractured historical narrative. Their Parisian apartment became a famous informal salon, a crossroads for the world's most interesting minds. On any given evening, one might find a grizzled explorer just returned from the Amazon, a young, ambitious artist from Montparnasse, and a quiet, thoughtful university professor, all engaged in a lively debate in their book-lined living room. Their greatest discovery, however, arrived 2 years after their wedding, a daughter whom they named Lyra after the celestial constellation. She was a child born with an adventurer's spirit and a scholar's curiosity, inheriting her father's fearless blue eyes and her mother's sharp, intelligent mind. She grew up not in a single stationary home, but in a world of train compartments, of steamer ship cabins, of tents pitched under 1,000 different starry skies. The world was her classroom, and history was her playground. One cool, clear winter afternoon in 1938, some 15 years after they had first met in the heat of the Egyptian desert, Evie and Jack stood once more on the cliffs overlooking the Valley of the Kings. They were older now, their faces etched with the fine lines of a life lived under the sun and filled with laughter. They were not here as adversaries or as partners in a desperate deal, but as honored guests of the Egyptian government, invited to consult on a new series of excavations. Below them, in the valley, a new generation of archaeologists was at work. Among them was their daughter, Lyra, now a bright, capable young woman of 12, listening with rapt attention as Rashid, their old, wise foreman, explained the meaning of a newly uncovered hieroglyph. "It feels like another lifetime ago," Evie said softly, her head resting on Jack's shoulder. "When I stood on this very spot, terrified and furious, watching you ride out of the desert." "I was a fool then," Jack said, his arm wrapped securely around her. "A charming fool, I hope, but a fool nonetheless. I came here looking for gold, for a prize to be won. I thought the treasure was buried under the sand." He smiled, a deep, contented expression. It took me a while to realize that the real treasure was the brilliant, stubborn, and utterly captivating archaeologist who was standing on top of it. She laughed, a familiar, happy sound. And I was a woman who lived by a very strict set of rules. I saw the world in black and white, a place of academic principles and ethical lines that could not be crossed. "You," she said, turning to him, her eyes full of a deep, abiding love, "taught me that the world was a messy, beautiful, and gloriously gray place. You taught me that the greatest discoveries are often found when you are brave enough to step off the map." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughter, a living testament to their love, a perfect fusion of their two spirits. She was the next chapter in their story, the one who would carry their legacy forward. Theirs was a love story that had been written across the globe, in the margins of ancient maps and in the dust of forgotten cities. It was the tale of a rogue who had found his honor, and of a scholar who had found her adventure. They had proven that the greatest treasures are not objects to be possessed, but stories to be shared. And the most valuable discovery of all was the one they had made in each other, a partnership that was as thrilling as any lost tomb, and a love that was more precious than all the gold of the pharaohs. As the sun began to set, casting its final, magnificent golden rays across the Valley of the Kings, Jack pulled his wife closer. "So," he murmured into her hair, "I hear there's a rumor of a lost Incan city in the mountains of Peru." Evie smiled, her eyes sparkling with the promise of their next adventure. For them, the story was never truly over. There was always a new horizon to chase, a new secret to uncover, a new chapter to write together. Life's greatest journey is not a destination to be reached, but an adventure to be lived. Do not be afraid to make a deal with the parts of the world that challenge you, for it is in the fusion of different perspectives that true wisdom is found. A true partnership is not about finding someone who is just like you, but about finding someone whose unique skills complete your own, creating a team that is stronger than its individual parts. The greatest treasures are not the ones we dig up from the past, but the future we build with the person we love.